because the song did not want to play today. I blame myself on that, even though I played it beforehand. We'll just blame those gremlins of technology. Francine did not want to get up and sing a song for you during communion, so I don't. Well, a couple weeks ago, my patience was wearing a little bit thin. Francine got home one day and she told me that when she drove the car, a couple of the lights on the dash had come on and there was this loud binging sound going on. So when I got home, I took it out for a spin and I knew exactly what she meant. I saw that a code had popped up on the dash there about the seat belt, about the airbags, and for the first minute of driving the car, this warning bell rang, supposedly telling us that someone did not have their seat belt on. So I got a hold quickly of Toyota, made an appointment. The appointment wasn't for a few days down the road, but we managed to hold out despite that annoying ringing that went off every time we drove the car. Finally, the day arrived. It was a Thursday. I took the car in, hoping that they would just be able to reset it, wave their magic scanner over the whole thing, and the thing would stop. It would be fixed. I waited there for about half hour, 40 minutes or so, and the guy came out and said there was a sensor in one of the seatbelt, the passenger seatbelt, and it had gone awry. It had gone kablooey. And it was telling the computer that even though the seatbelt was connected, it was telling it that it wasn't. And so it read that there was, weight in the seat, and so the car gave us the friendly reminder that person needed to buckle up. I don't know what your car is like when your seatbelt is not clicked, but ours is like a warning that a tornado is coming, all right? It bings and it bongs like a red alert when Klingons are attacking the Enterprise. It was so grating on the nerves, all right? They ordered the parts. They never seem to have parts anymore. It's weird. It must still be that COVID thing going on in the parts department. And we waited another few days for it to finally come. It did. They called. I made another appointment for this past Monday when I was so happy to go in and drop the car off. Now, I know this is a minor issue, all right? First world problem here where your car has a busted sensor, right? Sends an alarm for a minute or two. But after nearly a couple of weeks of this incessant binging every time we started the car, it was getting a wee bit irritating, all right? The wait seemed to take forever. But now, it is so nice to be able to get in, start the car, and drive without the noise. I can see my display telling me I'm probably driving a little bit too fast. But while I was in there, they also heard a squeak in the steering wheel and said they found a bearing in the column that needs to be replaced. And so that part is now being ordered, and I'm waiting for another call for another appointment to get rid of that annoying little squeak. Because apparently the squeaky wheel does not get the grease, it just needs a new bearing. I learned something this past week. Once upon a time, some friends of Jesus had to wait for him. But the circumstances of them having to stand by as Jesus' arrival was delayed was a lot different. And the consequences of his tardiness shook their faith to its core. We pick up today in John chapter 11, verses 1 and following. A man named Lazarus was sick. He lived in Bethany with his sisters, Mary and Martha. This is the Mary who later poured the expensive perfume on the Lord's feet and wiped them with her hair. Her brother, Lazarus, was sick. And so the two sisters sent a message to Jesus telling him, "Lord, your dear friend is sick." So we meet up with this trio of Jesus' friends from the town of Bethany. They're a family. There's two sisters and a brother, and they've known Jesus for a time. They were close to him as they called Lazarus his dear friend. Now, we've met Mary. We're going to read a story about her soon, the time when Jesus was having dinner at a Pharisee's house. And during the meal, she comes in, she sheds tears on his feet, wipes them with her hair, even poured really expensive perfume on them as a sign of honor. Feet are nasty enough today, and we have things like soap and showers, and we have shoes that breathe and keep the dirt off them. But back then, feet were just always sweaty and gross and filthy, all right? And in a couple of chapters, John's going to recount the time Jesus washed all of his disciples' feet and how much he showed them what it meant to serve. But Mary just knew that Jesus was special, and she wanted to honor him with this blessing. Even though at the time some, including one of his own disciples, thought it to be a waste of money. But these three siblings were good friends with Jesus, and we're told here that Lazarus has become very sick. With what? We are not told specifics here. Luke tends to be a little more explanations on the whole medical side of things, being a doctor and everything. But John says here he just got sick. So maybe it was cancer, or maybe his heart was beginning to fail. It could have been something as simple as an infection that got out of control. Because remember, at this time, there was no such thing as antibiotics. But his sickness was so bad, they began to fear for his life. He didn't seem to be getting better on his own. In fact, he was growing weaker. I remember the first time I got strep throat. I don't know if you ever had strep throat. At that point, I'd never heard of it before. But I was up in Ontario with Maritime Christian College at a youth conference, and on the way home, I just began to feel terrible. My throat was sore, my body was aching. I actually lay on the floor of the bus right in that middle all the way home. That was a real comfy ride. But I didn't get better. I just continued to get worse. My throat felt like there was someone in there with a hacksaw going at it. I felt like a truck had hit me. Zero energy. I had to crawl up the stairs to go to bed. And finally, Francine convinced me that I should go to the doctor. Because who wants to go to the doctor, right? He looked at my throat. I remember the expression on his face. He literally grimaced. He kind of waved his hands. It was just so gross. And it was so nasty. He sent me home with a very strong prescription. And I remember it was so amazing how fast, just a couple of days later, how much better I began to feel. But Lazarus had no such care. And so his sisters sent word to the only one they knew at this point could help him. I mean, they had seen Jesus' power. They knew he was able to touch the blind and give them their sight back. They had witnessed him tell crippled legs to walk, and they did. Now, they didn't have a texting plan. There was no 5G network yet in Bethany. And so they sent word to Jesus the old-fashioned way. Someone walked, and they found him. And here's what happens. But when Jesus heard about it, he said, Lazarus' sickness will not end in death. No, it happened for the glory of God, so that the Son of God will receive glory from this. So although Jesus loved Martha, Mary, and Lazarus, he stayed where he was for the next 2 days. This is quite an interesting statement that Jesus makes here. Lazarus is going to be just fine. Now, I want you to notice what he does not say. He does not say that he isn't going to die. Did you notice that? He says this illness will not end in death. Now, what's the difference, you may ask? Well, wait for it. Because even though Jesus makes this statement, At this point, he doesn't pack up his gear and begin the trek to go and see his good friend. In fact, we're told he puts his feet up and he stays put for another couple of days. I don't know, maybe it was Tuesday and there was going to be a new episode of The Mandalorian on Wednesday night that he didn't want to miss. I get that important stuff going on. But honestly, folks, it seems to me a little bit strange that Jesus gets word that his good friend is sick and is fading fast, and instead of making a beeline for Bethany, he just stays where he is. I remember when Francine had her car accident, I was at the hospital every day. I got the girls looked after as much as I could. Not that I didn't care about them, but they were, able to look after themselves. But I was there early in the morning. I was usually the last car to leave in the parking lot every night. And I watched her slowly getting better. I brought her as many coffees as she wanted because coffee has magical healing properties. I washed her hair. I got her things to read. I watched them change the dressings on her vacuum pump, which was good because when she got home, I had to change them during a snowstorm when the nurses couldn't make it out. I was a nurse. It was great. But I just wanted to be there and help her because she meant so much to me. Lazarus was such a good friend of Jesus. And Jesus had the power to make him better. But instead of rushing to his side, he stayed where he was for a couple more days. And as we find out in a moment, those days mean quite a lot because when he finally heads over and arrives, Lazarus has died. Lazarus arrived at Bethany. He was told that when Jesus arrived at Bethany, I can't say names today, he was told that Lazarus had already been in his grave for 4 days. Bethany was only a few miles down the road from Jerusalem, and many of the people had come to console Martha and Mary in their loss. When Martha got word that Jesus was coming, she went to meet him, but Mary stayed in the house. Martha said to Jesus, "Lord, if only you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now I know that God will give you whatever you ask." I want you to get this timeline into your brains, all right? Lazarus has been dead now, dead and buried 4 days. So, even if Jesus had created a jetpack and flew there in like under an hour, by the time the message that Lazarus was sick had gotten to him, Lazarus had already passed. It's interesting, I find here, that Mary stays home and doesn't come out to greet Jesus. I don't know, maybe she's grieving. Maybe she's upset at Jesus for not arriving sooner. Martha, we're told, Martha and he have some discussion, but then Jesus soon asks to be taken out to the gravesite. Everyone thinks Jesus wants to go there for some mourning by himself there, but he has some very different plans. Mary arrives, we're told, and is very upset. It says, "If only you had made it earlier, Jesus, my brother might still be alive." Then in the middle of all of this sadness and grieving and the horrors of death, John gives us a little bit of insight. That if we go too fast, we can actually miss it. Verse 33. Jesus saw her weeping and saw the other people wailing with her. A deep anger welled up within him, and he was deeply troubled. "Where have you put him?" he asked. And they told him, "Lord, come and see." And then Jesus wept. I've cried at funerals, as I'm sure most of you have as well. The feeling of losing a loved one is a weight that can barely be described with words. And at funerals, at visiting hours, we see others experiencing this grief. We observe the dark eyes, the lack of sleep, the many tears that can just come with zero warning. We can see kids there trying to understand the concept that they are never going to sit on their grandpa's lap again and listen to his great stories. Death is such a hard thing to process. And the grieving that comes with it hits us in waves. And while healing happens and we can continue on, we never just move on, right? The grief never really ends, does it? Surrounded by a family and their friends who were mourning. We're told Jesus weeps as well. But the tears do not seem to come for the same reason as the rest of them. Because we're told that as he looked around at the upset people, as he looked at the grave of his friend, he was troubled, and a deep anger welled up inside of him. Jesus didn't get angry a whole lot. He flipped out once at the temple at the indignity and the disrespect of his father's house being used as a money-making center for scam artists as they abused the system and ripped people off who just wanted to honor God and to serve him. And that day tables went flying and animals were scattered as feathers flew and monies were just whipped into the air all across the floor. He got upset at religious people as they placed these burdens on people, as they led them away from God and not towards him. And I'm pretty sure if he came to PEI today and had to drive behind tourists or roundabouts, the vein in his forehead might throb a little bit. That's understandable. But Jesus got angry. But here, he got angry in the middle of a funeral. The family was grieving. People were upset. They were crying over Lazarus' death. The same death he knew was coming, and yet stayed where he was for 2 days and missed it. Why was Jesus angry at the sight in front of him? I think because he understood why it had happened. His friend was dead because he got sick. But he got sick because ages ago sin entered the perfect world he had created. And even though God designed us originally to live forever in a perfect paradise, our own choice to do our own thing and to sin left us in an imperfect world. A world tainted with injustice, singed with greed and broken with perversions that keep on hurting us and killing us. Have you noticed that when something bad happens, how quickly how quickly we are to get upset, how much they want something to be done about it? We hear stories about abducted children or abused women, and we feel awful. We feel upset. We feel angry towards the people who do such terrible deeds. That movie that's out, The Sound of Freedom, I don't know if anyone's seen it yet, but it's doing remarkably well despite its people's doubts on it. But it tells the story of this man trying to help kids from being sold into the whole sex trafficking industry. I mean, it's not a go and feel good kind of movie that we go and laugh at. We go to relax and enjoy at the theater. But people are going to see it because there's something inside of us that wants a horrible thing like trafficking to be stopped. And those monsters who hurt kids and ruin their lives to be brought to justice. Because those things make us angry. Jesus got angry at the sight of death, at the sight of the consequences that sin in the world had brought. But he didn't just let his temper burn. Thankfully, he did something. It led him to this world and eventually to die on a cross to pay for the sin of the world, yours and mine. And then when he rose from the grave, he gave everyone the ability to no longer have to fear death. His resurrection opened the gates of heaven and to God's kingdom to anyone who chooses to follow Jesus. But before that happened, he wanted everyone to see and to hear about the glory of God and about the power that was soon going to be made available to them. Jesus was still angry as he arrived at the tomb, a cave with a stone rolled across it. Roll the stone aside, Jesus told them. But Martha, the dead man's sister, protested, Lord, he has been dead for 4 days. The smell will be terrible. Isn't that interesting? Still angry. He tells them to move the stone that covered the tomb where Lazarus was buried. But they were like, Lord, no, we can't do that. He's been dead 4 days. 4 days in the heat. 4 days with no embalming process other than a few spices. Anyone familiar with the King James Bible version of this? You got a version handy? You know how verse 39, the end of it goes? Anybody? He stinketh, right? Yeah, I bet he would have stinketh because the smell would be unbearable. But even though Jesus waited that extra time so that things would be extra stinky, the power of death had zero power stacked up against the power of God. And with one command, Lazarus' eyes opened, his heart began to beat again, and the stinketh was gone. My friends, the next time you feel angry towards the sin and the injustice and the hurt around you in this world, remember, Jesus came to do something. And until he comes again, there is going to be plenty more of it. People will continue to invent new ways to sin and to do evil. But he has given us a truth and a light to make a difference in the world. And we have the opportunity every day to punch holes in the darkness and to share hope and peace with an angry world. Let's pray. Father, thank you so much for this amazing story of Jesus' good friend who died, of a person that Jesus could have went to and told to get better and would have walked again and been completely healthy, and yet, in your perfect timing, he waited until he was dead and in the grave for days. Because in your power, God, death, whether it's an hour, a year, or 1,000 years, is nothing. Because you hold the keys to it all. I pray, Father, that those of us who follow you, as we know this truth and we have this truth in our hearts, this knowledge in our brains that we can share with everyone, that we would be so bold and so loving to do so. We would not keep it to ourselves. The people around us would see the light within us, that we would be able to shine light into this dark and angry world. And the injustices around us. And people would be able to know and see this truth and be led to a hope and a peace that is everlasting. In Jesus' name we pray.
Let's all stand.
Let earth and present
love Jesus and this blessing that we know that can change a person's life. We have the opportunity to do that, the goal is to do that, and we'll have to do that. God bless. Hope to see you all next week.